Chapter 1: The Last Journey of the Dyatlov Group. Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing and unexplained tragedies ever recorded in mountaineering history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing what places and what times of day or night these documented stories reach. The Ural Mountains of Russia have claimed countless lives over the centuries. Climbers lost to avalanches, hikers caught in brutal winter storms, expeditions that simply vanished into the endless white expanse. But no tragedy has captured the world's imagination quite like what happened on the night of February 1st, 1959, when 9 experienced Soviet hikers died under circumstances so bizarre, so inexplicable, that even after 65 years of investigation, we still cannot fully explain what killed them. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident, a mystery so profound that it changed the geography of Russia itself. The mountain pass where it occurred now bears the name of the expedition's leader, a permanent memorial to a tragedy that refuses to be solved. January 23, 1959. Sverdlovsk, Soviet Union. Igor Alexeyevich Dyatlov stood at the train station checking his equipment one final time. At 23 years old, he was already a veteran of the Ural Mountains, a fourth-year engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute with numerous difficult expeditions under his belt. He was meticulous, organized, and respected, exactly the kind of person you'd want leading a dangerous winter trek through one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. The expedition he had planned was ambitious, even by the standards of experienced Soviet mountaineers. The group would trek over 200 miles through the northern Urals in the dead of winter, when temperatures could plunge to minus 30 degrees Celsius or lower. Their destination, Gora Otorten, a mountain whose name in the local Mansi language meant "don't go there." The route was classified as Category 3, the most difficult and dangerous category of Soviet mountain expeditions. But Dyatlov was confident. He had assembled a team of 9 experienced hikers, all of them friends, most of them fellow students from the Polytechnic Institute. These weren't novices taking on more than they could handle. These were skilled outdoorsmen and women who had proven themselves in previous expeditions. Let me introduce you to the people who would never return from the mountain. There was Zenaida Kolmogorova, 22, a fourth-year student with blonde hair and an infectious laugh. Her friends called her Zina. She was known for her cheerful disposition and her ability to keep morale high, even in the harshest conditions. Lyudmila Dubinina, 20, studying engineering economics, was passionate about hiking and had kept detailed journals of previous expeditions. She was quiet but determined, the kind of person who never complained, no matter how difficult the trek became. Rustem Slobodin, 23, was Dyatlov's close friend and a skilled skier. He had a reputation for being the joker of any group, always ready with a story or a song to pass the long, cold nights in the tent. Yuri Doroshenko, 21, studying economics, and Yuri Krivonishenko, 23, both experienced hikers who had climbed together many times before. The two Yuris, as they were called, were inseparable friends. Alexander Kolovatov, 24, was the oldest after Dyatlov, a quiet man studying physics and nuclear engineering. He kept to himself but was known for his exceptional navigational skills. Nikolai Thibault Brignol, 23, had a French surname inherited from ancestors who had emigrated to Russia generations earlier. He was studying civil engineering and was known for his physical strength. Semyon Zolotaryov, 37, was the outlier of the group, older, more experienced, and something of an enigma. He had fought in World War II and bore the scars to prove it. Some sources suggest he had requested to join the expedition at the last minute, which raised eyebrows given that he barely knew the other members. But his experience made him a valuable addition, and Dyatlov accepted him. Finally, there was Yuri Yudin, 21, completing the original group of 10. Remember his name, because he would be the only one to survive, not through luck or skill, but because he made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. January 27, 1959. The group departed Sverdlovsk by train, heading north toward the Ural Mountains. They were in high spirits, laughing, singing, sharing food. Photographs from this period show young people full of life and enthusiasm, completely unaware that most of them had less than 2 weeks to live. The expedition wasn't just about climbing. According to official documents, the group had multiple objectives: to study the native Mansi people and the economy of the Ural region, to conduct surveys, and to deliver lectures upon their return about their findings. This was typical of Soviet expeditions during this period, combining athletic achievement with educational and cultural goals. On January 28th, the group arrived at Vijay, the last inhabited settlement before the mountains. From here, they would be completely on their own, traveling through wilderness where winter held absolute dominion. That same day, Yuri Yudin made a decision that would save his life. He was suffering from sciatica, severe back pain, and decided to turn back rather than risk injuring himself on the difficult trek ahead. His friends protested. They didn't want to lose a team member, but Yudin insisted. The pain was too severe, and he didn't want to slow the group down. They embraced him, said their goodbyes, and promised to share stories when they returned in 2 weeks. Yudin watched his 9 friends disappear into the snowy wilderness. He never saw any of them alive again. January 29th, 1959. The group made good progress despite the harsh conditions. Dyatlov kept a detailed trail log, and several members maintained personal diaries. On January 29th, Nikolai Thibault Brignol wrote, "Second day of our hike. We made our way from the Lozva River to the Auspia River. We walked along a Mansi trail. The weather is minus 13 degrees Celsius. The wind is weak." The tone was matter-of-fact, routine. These were experienced hikers doing what they loved. The men took turns breaking trail through the deep snow, 10 minutes each, rotating through all 7 male members of the group. They stopped every 70 minutes for rest. Everything was proceeding according to plan. By January 31st, the group had covered significant ground and were approaching the more challenging terrain. They cached some of their supplies, food, equipment they wouldn't need until the return journey, to lighten their loads for the difficult climbing ahead. This was standard practice for long expeditions. Dyatlov had planned to send a telegram to the sports club at their institute as soon as they returned to Vijay, confirming the group's safe return. The expected date, February 12th. This detail would become crucial later. February 1st, 1959. This was the day everything went wrong. But we don't know exactly when or how because no one survived to tell the story. The group had reached the slopes of Kholat-Syakhl, Dead Mountain in the Mansi language. The weather had deteriorated significantly. Winds were howling, visibility was poor, and the temperature had plummeted. At some point during the day, Dyatlov made a critical decision that would later be debated by investigators. Instead of descending to the forest line, where they would have natural shelter from the wind, he chose to pitch the tent on the exposed mountainside. Why? Some have suggested it was an error in navigation, that in the poor visibility, Dyatlov thought they were closer to their destination than they actually were and didn't want to lose the altitude they had gained by descending. Others have suggested that Dyatlov, as an experienced leader, wanted to practice winter camping in extreme conditions. This was, after all, a Category 3 expedition designed to test their skills. Whatever his reasoning, by late afternoon, on February 1st, the 9 hikers had pitched their tent on the slope of Dead Mountain, about 1,500 meters below the summit. They dug into the snow to create a level platform, secured the tent as best they could against the brutal wind, and crawled inside to escape the cold. We know they settled in for the night because later investigators found evidence that they had prepared for sleep, had removed their boots, changed into sleeping clothes, arranged their equipment. Someone had been repairing a torn jacket. There was food prepared, but not yet eaten. Everything suggested a normal evening in camp. And then, something happened. Something so terrifying, so immediate, so overwhelming, that 9 experienced hikers made a decision that defied all logic and training. They cut their way out of the tent from the inside, fled into the minus 30-degree night, wearing little or no clothing, and ran 1,500 meters down the mountain toward the forest. What could cause such panic? What could be so frightening that freezing to death seemed like the better option? The tent remained on the mountainside, partially collapsed, damaged but not destroyed. Inside were boots, warm clothing, supplies, everything the hikers would need to survive, but they never came back for any of it. By the time the sun rose on February 2nd, 1959, all 9 members of the Dyatlov group were dead, but it would be nearly a month before anyone knew something was wrong. And when search teams finally found what remained of the expedition, they would discover a scene so disturbing, so inexplicable, that it would launch one of the most extensive investigations in Soviet history. An investigation that would raise more questions than it answered. The mystery of Dyatlov Pass had begun. Chapter 2. The horrific discovery in the mountains. The story of the Dyatlov expedition could have ended as just another Soviet mountain tragedy, a group of students lost to the cold, mourned by their families, quickly forgotten by history. But what the search parties found on the snow-clad slopes of Kholat-Syakhl would transform the Dyatlov Pass incident into one of the most disturbing and enduring mysteries of the 20th century. A delayed rescue. The first sign that something was wrong was silence. February 12th, the expected return date, passed without news. At first, nobody panicked. Delays on winter expeditions were common, and the Dyatlov group were seasoned and well-prepared hikers. But as the days stretched into weeks, anxiety turned into dread. Families, fellow students, and even the remote Ural Polytechnic Institute sent telegrams. But the silence from the northern mountains was deafening. Finally, search parties were organized, first volunteers from the university and local communities, later joined by soldiers and professional rescuers. They braved howling winds, punishing snow, and a wilderness still locked in midwinter's grip. The only goal, find any trace of the missing 9. Discovery of the tent. On February 26, 1959, the rescue team found the tent. It was a discovery that would spark nightmares and decades of conspiracy theories. The tent was half collapsed, buried under a thin layer of snow on the mountain slope about 1,500 meters from the summit. The first detail that struck rescuers: the tent had been slashed open from the inside. Not a careful unzipping, but a desperate cutting. Sharp knives through thick canvas. It was as if whoever was inside had been forced to flee in panic, so urgent was their exit they didn't bother with the door. Inside, the scene was bizarre. Warm clothing, boots, food, even money and documents were left behind. Someone had been making repairs to a jacket. Another person had written in a diary. There were 9 sets of boots, coats, and supplies. Everything needed to survive the freezing night, carelessly abandoned. Searchers found footprints, 8 or 9 sets, leading away from the tent, descending the slope toward the forest beyond. These prints, some deep and clear, showed that most of the hikers had left barefoot or in socks, a few in only one boot. The line of prints extended for over 500 meters before merging with the windswept snow, fading away into the white. A grim trail. Following the footprints, the searchers descended toward the tree line a mile below. There, beneath the skeletal branches of a huge Siberian pine, they discovered the first horror. 2 bodies lay on the frozen ground, side by side, stripped of most of their clothing. The dead were Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko, the inseparable 2 Yuris. They wore only underwear, no shoes, and had burns on their hands and feet. The searchers found the remains of a small campfire, as if the 2 hikers had struggled to keep warm with whatever they could find before succumbing to hypothermia. The pine tree itself showed broken branches more than 5 meters up the trunk. It was clear the men had tried desperately to climb the tree, perhaps for a better vantage point, perhaps to escape something pursuing them. Their hands were raw and bloody, flesh torn from their fingers. Finding more victims. Not far from the first 2 bodies, rescuers discovered more: the body of Igor Dyatlov himself, lying face upward, one hand clutching a small branch, his head turned toward the tent as if he'd spent his final moments crawling back toward safety. Just a few hundred meters away, the body of Zenaida Kolmogorova, also facing the tent. It seemed that in their last moments, each hiker's greatest hope was to return to shelter. The 5th body, Rustem Slobodin, was later found halfway between the tent and the tree. He too was lightly clothed, lying in the snow, his skull with a hairline fracture, an injury that most experts agreed would not have been fatal on its own. For weeks, the searchers kept looking for the rest. Under the snowpack, brutal Ural winds continually reshaped the landscape. Only in May, when spring melt began, did they find the final 4 members: Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Alexander Kolovatov, buried beneath 4 meters of snow in a ravine, 70 meters from their last fire. Unimaginable injuries. The condition of these 4 would send investigators and the world reeling. Unlike the first 5, who seemed to have died of hypothermia, the ravine victims had suffered catastrophic injuries. Lyudmila Dubinina's ribs were shattered, and her tongue was missing. Semyon Zolotaryov's and Nikolai Thibault-Brignol's chests had been crushed by an unknown force, injuries similar to a car crash, with no external wounds, only deadly internal trauma. Dubinina and Zolotaryov were both missing their eyes, and Kolovatov had lost his eyebrows. There were no obvious signs of bleeding around these mutilations, which forensic experts said must have occurred after death in the running water of the ravine. The forensic report concluded that the force which caused these injuries was so tremendous that it could not have been caused by another human being. The phrase that entered the official records, chilling in its ambiguity, was a compelling natural force. Bizarre clues and questions. The investigators found more baffling clues. Some of the group had swapped clothes, indicating the survivors had taken garments from those who died first, trying to protect themselves from the cold. Dubinina was found wearing Krivonishenko's burned and torn trousers, her feet and shins wrapped in a piece of someone's jacket. Many of the victims' clothes carried traces of radioactivity. Some of the body's skin had taken on an orange or deep brown hue. Despite searches for any sign of an avalanche, the shallow slope and conditions at the site made a classic avalanche unlikely to have wiped out the group this way. Adding to the riddle, the last photos recovered from the hikers' cameras showed laughing faces, snowy landscapes, and, one chilling and unresolved frame, an eerie, blurred light across a night sky, taken not long before the tragedy. Theories and growing paranoia. The Soviet authorities, fearing rumors or panic, classified the case as top secret. Locals, investigators, and even fellow hikers began to speculate about what had really happened. Was it an avalanche? A fight within the group? Military tests gone wrong? Something stranger? Perhaps even supernatural forces? But conspiracy alone didn't kill 9 experienced hikers. The only facts were the bodies in the snow, the tent slashed from within, the frozen footprints down the mountainside, and the haunting sense that whatever happened that night, the Dyatlov group faced it together, braving the unknown as a team until the very end. Chapter 3. Clues that defy explanation. As investigators began to gather the evidence scattered across the Dyatlov campsite and surrounding wilderness, what was first seen as a tragic accident unraveled into a web of chilling and contradictory clues. For decades, journalists, scientists, and conspiracy theorists alike have pored over the details, each new fact raising as many questions as it answers. The tent, the first enigma. The simple tent, pitched on the slopes of Kolatsyakal, has become one of the most analyzed artifacts in the history of mysterious deaths. Found half-collapsed, snow-dusted, and full of the group's gear, it stood as a silent witness to a night of terror. But its most bewildering detail was its makeshift exit. Multiple deep knife slashes, clearly cut from the inside. Hypothermia victims don't typically destroy their primary shelter. Yet here, 9 experienced hikers had cut through canvas rather than unfasten the door. Why? Inside, all essentials were left behind. Boots, coats, food, compasses, lanterns, even personal diaries. The absence of panic in these written records. No one records fear or unusual subject matter, only deepens the mystery. Footprints in the snow. The group left distinct tracks, trailed down the mountainside for several hundred meters. The stride was orderly, not frenzied, a detail that perplexes experts. Some prints showed bare feet or socks, others a single boot, but rescue teams noted they weren't running or fleeing chaotically, at least initially. Only as the tracks reached the tree line did they fade, erased by wind and new snow. Campfire clues and desperate measures. At the tree line, beneath a mighty pine, the searchers encountered evidence of a desperate survival attempt. The remains of a small fire and the bodies of Krivonishenko and Doroshenko in their underwear. Broken branches high in the tree suggested one or both men had attempted to climb for a vantage point, or to break off limbs as fuel. Flesh was found embedded in the bark. Their hands were mutilated, likely from frantic grabbing. The missing clothes puzzled investigators. The answer came with the discovery of Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin, each wearing pieces belonging to the others. It appeared that the first to perish had surrendered some of their garments to those still holding out against the cold. Even so, none were fully dressed, suggesting either acute panic or circumstances that offered no time to gather possessions. Disturbing injuries, more than hypothermia. The second major discovery came with the remaining 4 bodies in May, found in a ravine under 4 meters of snow. Here the story took a nightmarish turn. Unlike the others who succumbed to cold, these victims had suffered massive traumatic injuries. Zolotaryov and Thibaut Brignol had crushed ribs and significant internal damage. Dubinina had multiple fractured ribs, and most horribly, her tongue and part of her lips were missing. Some bodies were missing eyes as well, yet no major external wounds were visible, just injuries as if from a powerful force, like a car crash, but soft tissue almost untouched. These wounds confounded the Soviet medical examiner, who concluded the force required to cause such damage would be equal to the effect of a car accident. But with no tracks, no evidence of falling debris, and little sign of struggle, what could have inflicted such harm? Radioactivity and unusual clothing. Even more alarming was the presence of radioactive contamination. 2 of the hikers' garments were found to emit radiation several times above normal background levels. Some speculated the group had encountered secret military testing or been exposed to fallout from a weapon. However, only a subset of their clothing was affected, and no widespread radiation was found at the site. No one has explained why only these garments, or why the source was so localized. Colors of death. Another eerie clue: the skin of several victims had turned an unnatural orange-brown color by the time they were discovered. Soviet examiners and later Western analysts have disagreed on the cause. Was it simple decomposition due to cold and sun exposure, or was it evidence of something more sinister, perhaps poisoning, burns, or exposure to an unknown chemical? Strange orbs and lights. Adding to the confusion were eyewitness accounts from local Mansi hunters and others in the region. Several reported seeing glowing orange orbs in the sky over Kholat Syakhl during the very night of the tragedy. Some theorized these were Soviet military parachute flares, missile tests, or something else unexplainable. The last frame on one of the group's cameras shows a blurry light streak on a dark background, a possible photo of the phenomenon, or perhaps simply an accident of the film. The Mansi mystery. In the early days, authorities suspected local Mansi tribespeople. The group had traversed their sacred lands. Perhaps they had been killed for ritual or revenge. There were Mansi trails nearby and stories of recent ceremonial gatherings. However, the Mansi, though questioned and even detained, were quickly cleared. They were peaceful herders, and the forensic evidence did not match violence with weapons or tools. In fact, many Mansi helped with the rescue. Yet their beliefs and warnings about the dead mountain added a layer of folklore and suspicion. Official secrecy and paranoia. Within weeks, Soviet officials classified the case. Local villagers were banned from collecting water from nearby wells, and the entire area was closed for years. Why such secrecy for a presumed accident? Some believe it was to suppress evidence of military technology or radiation exposure. Others suspect the authorities simply didn't want to fuel rumors of supernatural causes. The unending questions. As evidence mounted, so did the contradictions. Why did some flee in socks, while others later appeared to have put on more clothes? Why were there no neighbors, rescuers, or predators at the scene for weeks, yet tissue was missing only on some bodies? If an avalanche was the cause, why was the tent and campfire site barely covered by fresh snow? Why was only part of the group buried deeply, with others left exposed? The Dyatlov group's own cameras, diaries, and belongings yielded no answers. Instead, they painted a portrait of a skilled, happy team, full of jokes, songs, and optimism until the last day. Chapter 4: Theories, from Science to the Supernatural. For over 6 decades, the Dyatlov Pass incident has haunted researchers, scientists, and conspiracy theorists alike. What happened to 9 experienced hikers on the night of February 1st, 1959? The answer depends on who you ask, and every theory, from the scientifically plausible to the wildly paranormal, attempts to make sense of evidence that refuses to fit neatly into any single narrative. The avalanche theory, nature's deadly force. The most recent and officially accepted explanation is that an avalanche killed the group. In 2020, Russian authorities concluded their investigation by declaring that a delayed slab avalanche was the most likely cause of the tragedy. Here's how it could have happened. The hikers dug into the slope to create a flat platform for their tent, inadvertently destabilizing the snowpack above them. Hours later, strong katabatic winds, cold air flowing downhill, accumulated additional snow on the slope. This created the perfect conditions for a slab avalanche, a large sheet of compacted snow that breaks away and slides downhill with tremendous force. In January 2021, a team of scientists from Switzerland and Russia published a study in the journal Nature Communications, Earth and Environment that used computer modeling to demonstrate how such an avalanche could occur even on a relatively gentle slope. Their models showed that the tent, positioned between the falling slab and the compacted snow floor reinforced by skis, would have acted like a vice, crushing anyone inside. This would explain the massive internal injuries, crushed ribs, fractured skulls, with minimal external trauma. The hikers, awakened by the impact, would have cut their way out of the collapsed tent in panic and fled downhill, unable to return for their boots and warm clothing because the tent was buried or blocked by snow. But there are problems with this theory. First, searchers who found the tent reported that it was only lightly covered with snow, not buried by an avalanche. The tent was damaged, but largely intact, and the footprints leading away from it were orderly, not the chaotic tracks of people fleeing a sudden disaster. Second, avalanches typically leave obvious signs: broken trees, displaced snow, debris fields. None of these were present at the site, and crucially, only 4 of the 9 victims had severe injuries consistent with avalanche trauma. The other 5 died of hypothermia with relatively minor injuries. The military testing theory. A Soviet cover-up? Many believe the hikers stumbled into a secret Soviet military testing zone and became accidental casualties of Cold War weapons experiments. The evidence supporting this theory is compelling. Several witnesses reported seeing bright orange spheres or lights in the sky on the night of the incident. Some of the victims' clothing showed traces of radioactive contamination. The Soviet government immediately classified the case and closed the area to the public for 3 years. Records confirm that parachute mines, aerial explosives that detonate before hitting the ground, were being tested in the general region around that time. Parachute mines produce a very specific type of injury, massive internal damage from the shockwave with little external trauma, exactly what was found on the ravine victims. The theory suggests that the hikers heard explosions, panicked, and fled their tent. Those who survived the initial cold were then killed by subsequent explosions or shockwaves as military testing continued. One particularly dark version of this theory suggests that a prototype thermobaric weapon, a fuel-air explosive, was accidentally detonated near the camp, causing the catastrophic injuries and explaining the orange lights, the radiation traces, and the Soviet government's desperate need to cover up what happened. The problems? If military testing was responsible, why would the government allow searchers to recover the bodies and conduct autopsies? Why not simply declare the area off-limits and remove all evidence? And if an explosion occurred, where are the burn marks, the shrapnel, the evidence of detonation? Infrasound and katabatic winds. Nature's silent killer. Perhaps the most scientifically intriguing theory involves infrasound, sound waves at frequencies below human hearing that can cause intense psychological and physical effects. The Dyatlov Group's own diary mentions a strange wind that sounded like a jet engine in the days before the tragedy. Katabatic winds, powerful downslope winds created by cold air flowing from higher elevations, are known to occur in the Ural Mountains. When these winds encounter certain terrain features, they can create a phenomenon called a Kármán vortex street, a pattern of spinning vortices that produce intense infrasound. Infrasound at certain frequencies, around 19 Hz, can cause extreme feelings of dread and panic, disorientation and confusion, visual hallucinations, physical symptoms, including chest pressure and difficulty breathing. The theory suggests that the hikers were struck by infrasound-generating winds, which caused irrational panic. They fled the tent in terror, convinced something was pursuing them or that the mountain itself was attacking. In their panicked state, they ran into the deadly cold, where hypothermia quickly claimed their lives. This would explain why the group fled without proper clothing, why they cut through the tent rather than using the entrance, and why they never returned for supplies even though the tent remained standing. The criticism? Infrasound could explain the panic, but it doesn't explain the severe physical injuries found on 4 of the victims. And if everyone fled together in panic, why did some try to return to the tent while others built a fire and climbed a tree? The Yeti and UFO theories. When logic fails. Where science offers incomplete answers, pseudoscience rushes in. Some theories about Dyatlov Pass venture into the realm of the paranormal. The Yeti theory suggests that the hikers encountered a Yeti or similar cryptid in the wilderness. The indigenous Mansi people have legends of dangerous creatures in the mountains, and some theorists point to the massive force required to cause the injuries as evidence of a large, powerful animal. The UFO theory focuses on the orange lights reported in the sky and suggests alien involvement, perhaps an encounter that caused the hikers to flee, or even alien experimentation that explains the missing soft tissue and radiation. Both theories rely heavily on speculation and offer no physical evidence beyond the mysterious lights and the inexplicable nature of the tragedy. Most serious researchers dismiss these explanations as fantasy. Human conflict? Murder in the mountains? Could the answer be simpler and darker, that someone in the group committed murder? Some theorists point to the fact that Semyon Zolotaryov was a relative stranger who joined the expedition at the last minute, that he had military experience, and that his background remains somewhat mysterious. Could there have been a fight within the group? A romantic dispute? A secret mission gone wrong? The problems with this theory are insurmountable. The injuries were too severe to have been caused by human hands. The medical examiner was explicit about this. And all 9 members fled the tent together, suggesting they were united against a common threat rather than divided by internal conflict. The truth is probably worse. The most disturbing aspect of the Dyatlov Pass incident isn't any single theory. It's that none of them fully explain what happened. Each theory accounts for some of the evidence, while leaving other clues unexplained. It's entirely possible that multiple factors combined to create a perfect storm of disaster: unusual weather conditions, poor decision-making under stress, panic, hypothermia, and perhaps an avalanche or military accident that has been carefully covered up. What we know for certain is this: 9 people went into the mountains. Something terrified them so badly that they fled into deadly cold, and whatever killed them was powerful enough to crush human bodies while leaving few external marks. The rest, the how and why, remains locked in the frozen silence of the Ural Mountains, a secret the dead took with them into the snow. Chapter 5: Legacy, Memory, Pilgrimage, and Unending Mystery. The Dyatlov Pass incident is more than an unsolved mystery. It has become a Russian cultural touchstone, a cautionary tale about nature's indifference, government secrets, and the haunting fragility of life. Decades after the last funeral, the legacy of those 9 hikers continues to shape the region, the families who still remember, and the world's fascination with what truly happened on the slopes of Dead Mountain. The aftermath: families and funerals. The return of the bodies began a nightmare for those left behind. On March 9, 1959, the first funerals took place in Mihailovskoye Cemetery, Sverdlovsk. Yuri Doroshenko and Zina Kolmogorova found their last piece, followed by Yuri Krivonishenko and the rest of the group in the weeks after. The funerals were emotional and traumatic. Family members recalled being called to the morgue for identification, only able to recognize their loved ones by scars or gaps in their teeth. Some relatives fainted at the sight. Others were left so emotionally shattered that physical ailments followed, like Kolovatov's mother, whose legs were paralyzed by grief. A monument was erected in the cemetery in 1962, bearing the photos of all 9 members, a somber echo reminding every visitor that these were real people lost to an unfathomable tragedy. In August 1963, a granite memorial plaque was placed on the actual pass's slope, engraved, "In memory of those who have gone and will never return, we have named this pass after Dyatlov." The sole survivor's burden. Yuri Yudin, the 10th member who turned back with illness before disaster struck, spent his life as both a living memorial and searcher. He struggled with survivor's guilt, dedicating years to public lectures and supporting investigations. In 2016, a memorial in Perm was inaugurated in his honor after his death in 2013. Yudin's story reminding all future hikers how thin the line separating life from death can truly be. Enduring fascination, culture, and pilgrimage. The case gripped Russia, and then the world. Books, documentaries, and fictionalizations followed. The film Devil's Pass, hundreds of podcasts, and countless television specials. Every major Russian media outlet has covered new developments, trying to piece together the evidence with the benefit of modern science, and sometimes with flights of speculation. For many, the Dyatlov Pass has become a site of pilgrimage. Hikers venture to Kholat Syakhl to honor the memory of the lost 9 and experience firsthand the wild beauty and danger that claimed them. Ceremonies are held at the granite monument. Flowers and photographs are left every year. Even visitors who do not believe in curses or conspiracy speak of a powerful presence in the pass, a place marked indelibly by tragedy. Universities and science institutes continue to study the case, either by retracing routes, re-examining diaries, or experimenting with cold weather survival in the region. Yet all agree, nature itself does not care about human plans. The families search for truth. For the hikers' families, closure never truly came. Soviet secrecy in 1959 frustrated any open investigation. No newspapers, no explanations, just rumors and official silence. Parents saw their children's skin the color of bricks, hair grayed overnight, trauma and rumors swirling in the vacuum left by the state's refusal to speak plainly. Tatiana Perminova, Igor Dyatlov's sister, remembers the call she received in March 1959. Igor is dead. Her parents were summoned to the university, the nightmare began, and she was kept home from the funeral for fear it would be too traumatic. Others spent years trying to uncover the secrets, holding memorial events and sharing old photos, hoping that new evidence would come to light. But as Tatiana put it, even years later, the only information was state secrets, more mystery than clarity. The Dyatlov Foundation, an ongoing investigation. In 1999, the Dyatlov Foundation was established in Yekaterinburg, supported by the Ural State Technical University and directed by Yuri Kuntsevich. Its mission? To continue the investigation and preserve the legacy of the 9 hikers, establishing the Dyatlov Museum and supporting researchers from around the world. This included digitizing photos and diaries, organizing annual expeditions, and maintaining contact with victim families. The foundation also supports any new official efforts to reinvestigate the case, as Russian authorities periodically reopen files. even in 2020, when new avalanche modeling was applied to the site in hopes of resolving the mystery at last. Modern myth and mystery. What happened in 1959 has become a part of Russian and global mythology. Dyatlov Pass is invoked in everyday speech to describe unsolvable riddles, and the word conjures images of snow, terror, and the possibility that human knowledge can be defeated by nature, or secrecy, or the unknown. Memorial plaques, monuments, and published accounts show how the story has become a touchstone for many, those who see in it a warning about recklessness, or a prompt for scientific curiosity, or even an emblem for the dangers of unchecked state power. Pilgrimage and remembrance. Pilgrims continue to visit the pass. Hikers retrace the expedition, camp at the same site, and perform ceremonies for the lost. Local Mansi people and modern hikers both leave symbolic objects at the granite marker, blending personal and cultural memory. Few claim supernatural feelings, but most acknowledge the presence of the mountain's history. A heavy silence, a sense of humility before what happened in 1959. The truth still missing. Despite new science, declassified documents, and endless theorizing, the incident remains unsolved. For families, investigators, and countless fans, the Dyatlov Pass tragedy is not simply a puzzle, but a reminder. Some things are bigger than humanity's ability to explain. Whether caused by a cascade of natural disasters, a fateful mistake, or something infinitely stranger, the reality is that 9 bright, ambitious young lives were lost in one desperate night. Their memorial is etched in stone, in Russia's cultural imagination and in the frozen ground of the Ural Mountains,